Since I can remember, I've lived through situations that I could describe as paranormal. The house where I spent my early years was full of stories, even before I was born. I recall strange moments from my childhood, but nothing compares to what happened to me a few weeks ago. About 10 years ago, we lived in my uncle's house, just a few blocks from climbing Cerro de la Estrella. There, I saw an old woman. I can't explain it well, but her silhouette would cross the living room and head toward the dining area. Sometimes I would see her near the front door, just as someone was about to arrive. Suddenly, she stopped appearing, and for reasons unrelated, we moved out. We returned a little over a year ago. My older brother is no longer living at home, so I have my own room. Sometimes we remember the old woman, but everything feels calm now, with no signs of the paranormal. I made close friends, especially during vacations, since we don't go to the same school. However, a few weeks ago, a transformer nearby failed, leaving us without power. I had just said goodbye to my friends, but the blackout forced me to go back. They were chatting on the sidewalk with a neighbor girl we were all infatuated with, in a platonic way. The darkness reminded me that in situations like this, it's easy to talk with neighbors. When I approached, I overheard them sharing ghost stories. These weren't just tales. Marlene and her mom were talking about a woman who appears in their house and watches them sleep. Her mom claimed that she and her husband had seen her standing at the foot of their bed in the middle of the night. The atmosphere was perfect for telling scary stories. Another neighbor recounted an incident in the adjacent street. A girl who had been abandoned, who made those walking by after midnight hear footsteps of heels behind her. She also spoke of a woman's quiet weeping coming from the shadows between parked cars. The power came back on, and feeling a bit anxious, I decided to quicken my pace home. I didn't want to hear those heels behind me. But just as I turned onto my street, a distant thunderclap signaled that the lights would go out again. At that moment, the air grew thick, and the night seemed to come alive. The silence became unsettling, and I wondered if there was truly something beyond what I could see. Yet, curiosity pushed me to keep walking, feeling that the unknown was lurking in the darkness. I turned around and walked towards where my friends had been, but they were gone. Neither they nor Marlene were there. Only the two ladies remained chatting on the street. I felt embarrassed to approach them and explain that I didn't want to come home to an empty house without light, especially after talking about ghosts. So I gathered my courage, convinced myself that ghosts didn't exist, and hurried home. Despite having seen strange things before, it's amazing how our brains provide comfort by convinced that what we feel isn't real. When I entered, I noticed that the candle I had lit before leaving was out, even though I had placed it on a wide plate of water to prevent it from tipping over. The dim light illuminated a figure standing with its back to me in the kitchen, staring at the wall. A small, nearly suffocated scream escaped, but I tried to silence it, fearing it could be someone who meant to harm me. The figure turned slightly towards me, but didn't fully face me. I didn't know what to think or say. It was like looking in a mirror. Its appearance was identical to mine, even down to the clothes. My legs gave way, and I fell to the floor, unable to scream. The figure slowly turned around to face me and walked towards me. But before reaching me, it turned and headed for the stairs. I could hear it clearly as it ascended, the railing creaking under its weight. Then, I heard it enter my room. I looked at my phone. The battery was completely dead. We only had a cordless phone at home, so I was utterly alone with no way to contact my friends. When I finally regained control of my legs, I ran out into the street. There was no one around. Small flickers of candlelight shone from the windows of nearby houses. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door and asking to stay there until my parents arrived, but I couldn't explain why I was afraid to be home. I steeled myself, knowing I had to figure it out. While seeing a ghost or a demon would terrify me, I also felt an immense curiosity about that figure in my house that looked just like me. I took the candle and slowly walked towards the stairs, determined to find out what was going on. I wanted to hear voices as I climbed, but everything fell silent as I leaned on the railing. My door was right at the top of the stairs, and I couldn't hear anything inside. I placed the candle on the floor and tried to peek under the door, but saw nothing. Suddenly, fear overwhelmed me. I thought about what would happen if something horrific peeked back at me. I stood up and tried to descend, but I could swear I saw a silhouette at the end of the stairs. I dashed towards my parents' room. Just before I could open the door, the light came on suddenly, and the sound of all the appliances turning on calmed me for a moment. With the light on, I gathered the courage to open my bedroom door. Everything was intact. I went down to the kitchen and dining room. Everything seemed normal. I calmed down, and my parents didn't take long to arrive. I felt embarrassed to tell them what had happened because they were giving me more responsibilities and letting me stay home alone when necessary. To be honest, I feel a bit proud that I survived that and have an interesting story to tell. But now I have a huge fear, actually a panic, of the lights going out again. The date is approaching, so I decided to share for the first time how I experienced my mother's death. Get comfortable, because it's a bit of a long story. I remember that when you are close to someone who is going to die, time seems to slow down. Every word and gesture from her took on new meaning, and I made an effort to memorize her scent and all those sensations I wanted to preserve for the day I would have to say goodbye. It's strange how these experiences sometimes lead us to have odd dreams about the final fate of our loved ones. In my case, it was something deeper. I was in the U.S. when I heard a voice telling me not to share any more bad news with my mom. That voice resonated so clearly that I stopped telling her about the negative. From then on, whenever I spoke with her, I only shared good moments and stopped complaining. However, sadness washed over me when I returned to Torreon with a bad cold, right on my birthday. Despite being sick, I felt another voice telling me there was an illness in the brain. I thought it referred to me, but deep down I knew it was about my mother. The possibility shattered my heart, because I couldn't imagine someone so incredible suffering from something like Alzheimer's. I attributed that strange feeling to my illness and tried to ignore it. 2 weeks later, Mom started having severe headache. We took her for a bunch of tests, and while I filled with panic, the voice I had heard began to make sense. That night, I heard her delirious, mentioning things that weren't true about my older sister. It was then that I decided to talk to another sister about my suspicion, omitting the part about the voice. The reaction wasn't what I expected. She got angry, and we fought. It was difficult to accept that someone I loved could have a terminal illness, so I waited patient till my sister witnessed Mom's delirium. Eventually, we managed to get her a brain MRI. 2 days later, the doctors gave us the news. Something was wrong in her brain. Although they couldn't decide if it was a tumor or cystic turcosis, when I heard the word tumor, I knew I had to research it. I immersed myself in the internet, and one term stood out: glioblastoma multiforme. In that moment, I felt the voice returning, but this time I chose silence. I didn't want anyone to think I was going crazy, so I kept my thoughts to myself. The doctors told us they needed to perform a procedure to analyze it, but it was a high-risk surgery that could incapacitate her. The situation grew desperate as they denied us other options for diagnosing her condition, and the surgeon insisted on proceeding without giving us clarity. A few days later, my mom's pain became so intense that she cried non-stop, vomited a lot, and writhed in agony. During those moments, we took her to the emergency room. We all knew how terrible the hospital was, so we never left her side. One night, I stayed with her in the emergency room, where she was mostly sedated. The few times she was awake, I comforted her, held her hand, and told her that God would give us peace. The doctors would come by to check on her, and during one of those visits, I discreetly read a paper one of them was holding. There it was, glioblastoma multiforme. In that moment, I stopped ignoring the voice I had heard and surrendered to the harsh reality. My mom woke up during one of those moments and, with anguish, said she just wanted it all to end, that she couldn't bear the pain any longer. In a moment of honesty, I told her she had a terminal tumor and that she had only a few months to live. She complained that it was too long to endure so much suffering. I tried to reassure her, saying it might be less time. I prayed to God to relieve her pain. I remember that conversation as the coldest I've ever had with her. To cope with my fear, I started training in karate almost every day. It was the only time I could release my pain. At home, we had a rule of not crying, so I had to suppress all my feelings for hours, which felt unbearable. One day while training, a classmate asked how much time my mom had left. I heard the voice again. September. Without thinking, I answered that she would live until then, fully aware that this voice always told the truth. That day, I asked the voice for two things. First, that my mom wouldn't go blind, as the doctors had mentioned it could happen. And second, that she wouldn't die alone, but surrounded by her family. Both wishes were fulfilled in the week my mom passed away. When she stopped speaking and only slept, she occasionally opened her eyes and looked at us. The day before her death, my younger brother messaged us on text message about a discovery he made in my mom's Bible. He found a message I had never seen before, written by her, Under the desired tree, I sat, and its fruit was sweet to my palate. I am well. In that moment, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. It was her goodbye. I rushed home from work and found her in a state that broke my heart. She was completely gone. My sister and I gave her a warm bath, trying to stimulate her circulation. We were so sad that we couldn't talk to each other. We just took care of her. Without warning, all my siblings gathered at home, even those who lived far away. It was an inexplicable feeling. That night, we had dinner together, tried to say goodbye, and prayed. I felt a supernatural presence urging me to talk to my mom, so I leaned close and whispered, "Mom, we're okay, and we will be okay. We're grown now, rest." In the morning, while my brothers were having dinner with Mom, she passed away. It was September 9th, 2015, just 2 days after the funeral. As I was cleaning the house, I walked by the room where she used to sleep during her last months. Suddenly, I clearly heard her voice calling me. A jolt of panic made me bump against the door. I was completely alone in the house and wasn't prepared for something like that. I stood still for a few seconds, waiting for something to happen. Then, gathering my courage, I said, "No, Mom, we don't have time for this." I turned around, closed the door to the room, and felt as if she had truly left that day.